If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably because a child you love and care for is differently wired. Are they also struggling in their current educational setting, seen only for what they're doing wrong while longing for positive relationships with peers and others? Envision a world where your child's unique abilities are not just recognized, but celebrated. A world where they can connect with others and their true potential is seen and appreciated. The Strength-Based Assessment Lab's mission is to build a world for your child just like that. Through its innovative approach, it aims to empower students, families, educators, and professionals to create positive, effective, and collaborative learning experiences. Be a part of shaping a brighter future for your child. Visit www.bgs.edu to learn more about what a strength-based assessment could mean for your family. That's bgs.edu.
I felt like there was no guidebook. There's no rule book. You get the what to expect for pregnancy. They have what to expect books for different ages and stages now. But, when we get a diagnosis of ADHD, we get maybe a fact sheet or two, a prescription, and we're just pushed out into the world on our own to figure it out.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and my guest this week is Penny Williams, author of the book Boy Without Instructions, Surviving the Learning Curve of Parenting a Child with ADHD, as well as The Insider's Guide to ADHD and What to Expect When Parenting a Child with ADHD. Penny is also the founder of Parenting ADHD and Autism, which features a blog, coaching, and the Parenting ADHD podcast, all aimed at helping parents raising special kids survive, thrive, and parent with purpose. In our conversation today, Penny shares her story of raising her differently wired son, gives us the inside scoop on her books, and shares some of her best strategies for getting through the tough moments with our unique kiddos. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Before I get to that chat, I recently created a little cheat sheet, a one-page downloadable PDF that you can print out and stick to your fridge, featuring my 10 best parenting strategies that I took away from the podcast episodes I produced last year. The cheat sheet features advice from people like Dr. Ross Greene, author Jessica Leahy, executive function coach Seth Perler, and more. I designed it to give you kind of a quick, helpful strategy sheet, a little parenting SOS, if you will. I also put together 6 beautifully designed wallpaper quotes from the strategies for your mobile phone so you can grab some inspiration on the go. To download those and the cheat sheet, just go to tiltparenting.com/cheat sheet. And now here is my conversation with Penny. Hey Penny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Debbie. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I feel like we are two moms in the trenches and dealing with some pretty similar issues. So I think this should be an interesting conversation. But as a way of introducing you to listeners, could you tell us a little bit about your personal story? I know that's what one of your books is about, but can you share with us who you are and who your son is and what's going on in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So about a little over 9 years ago, my son was first diagnosed with ADHD. He had really struggled in kindergarten, and he did start early. He is an October baby, but we knew he was really smart, and we didn't really realize that we had anything going on other than kind of a really active boy, And so kindergarten was super rough, and he was constantly in trouble. The teacher was constantly calling me, but nobody ever said, hey, there might be something to this. It was always, you didn't prepare him for kindergarten. He wasn't ready for this. You need to talk to him at home. You need to give him chores so he learns responsibility. All of these excuses for why he was having all this troublesome behavior. And most of it really was hyperactivity and inattention. He wanted to run around that awesome room and check everything out. He didn't want to be on a schedule. He didn't want to do what everybody else was doing, and so it was a real issue for the teacher. And so we switched schools because that was a charter school, and they had made some decisions that we certainly didn't agree with, like the kindergarten teacher having her infant in the classroom the second half of the year, every minute of the entire school day. And so, there's 18 5-year-olds running around this tiny cramped room, and they're always hearing, watch out for the baby, quiet for the baby. It didn't make any sense to me. And so we decided that we just didn't really agree with some of the decisions there. And we went to public school, and he got the most fantastic first grade teacher. She does differentiated instruction. She's super kind and understanding and very patient. And he still was having the same problems. And so I knew at that point there had to be more to his story. And so, I ran him to the pediatrician as fast as I could. I'm like, please help me. I can't do this anymore. I thought this new school was going to make a big difference, and it's not. So it wasn't the school. It wasn't the teacher in kindergarten. There's more here. And eventually, we went through the process. We went to a behavioral MD. He diagnosed ADHD very quickly. And because he had a great teacher, and because his dad and I were pretty intuitive in our parenting approach as far as trying some behavior modification, although we had no idea we were doing it, his first suggestion was medication and therapy. And I was in complete shock. I once he started having the same struggles in first grade that he did in kindergarten, I immediately started Googling and trying to figure out what was going on, and so I was reading tons of material about learning disabilities, a little bit about ADHD, and I had convinced myself before we ever had the evaluation that it could not be ADHD, had to be some sort of learning disability. And so, I went in there with the wrong mindset and then was shocked when I got the outcome. And so it took us a few days, but, we felt like we had already desperately tried everything we could think of. And the physician was right. The teacher was doing everything that she could in the classroom to accommodate. And he was really a very sad child. When I look back at photos of him from like kindergarten and early first grade, he was always crying. He was always feeling like he couldn't do what people wanted him to do, and it was really, really impacting his life from a mental health standpoint. And so we decided that we would try medication. And if it wasn't a good outcome, if the side effects were not appropriate, whatever happened, we could always stop. But we just felt desperate to do something else to really help him. And so here we are 9 years later. He has additional diagnoses of dysgraphia, executive functioning deficits, written expression disorder, and high functioning autism. And he also has a gifted IQ. So he has quite the alphabet soup. And, early on when I couldn't figure out what was going on, I started blogging. I said, if I put out there what's happening, maybe somebody will find us and tell me what's going on, right? Because just desperation. And nobody found me until I started using the term ADHD. And then suddenly people were flocking to the blog, and I started having conversations with other parents and realizing I wasn't the only one. And, it just snowballed from there. And after a few years, I could kind of look back and say, there really was a process that would have been awesome if I had had it, if I'd had that knowledge and information that would have helped us get to that place a whole lot faster. And that's why I wrote What to Expect When Parenting Children with ADHD, because I felt like there was no guidebook. There's no rule book. You get the What to Expect for pregnancy. They have What to Expect books for different ages and stages now. But, when we get a diagnosis of ADHD, we get maybe a fact sheet or two, a prescription, and we're just pushed out into the world on our own to figure it out. And it's not that easy to figure out, it's a difficult process. And so, I struggled for a really long time, and I started writing more, putting these systems together and approaching it from a system standpoint to help other families not struggle so long.
So, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. I think a lot of listeners, including me, relate to a lot of what you're sharing, especially that sense of overwhelm that there really is no roadmap here. And
exactly.
And we feel like pioneers, and when really we're everywhere. That's the thing I find so ironic about this entire world we're living in, that there's so many differently wired kids and we are everywhere, but still feel like we're having to figure it out on our own. So thank you for putting that out there and sharing your systems with us. Tell me about your book, Boy Without Instruction. So did that come before the What to Expect When Parenting Children with ADHD?
It did, actually. The first book idea I had was the What to Expect book. But by the time I started trying to put together my first book, I already had this big accumulation of stories from my first blog, which was A Mom's View of ADHD. And so it was this chronological story of us, our struggle and trying to figure things out. And I thought it would be really helpful for other parents to know they're not alone. That's a big thing for us as parents of special needs kids, is we feel so alone and isolated because we internalize that it must be our fault the way things are going for our kids. And so, I wanted to be very honest about our experience so that other parents could say, hey, I'm not the only one. It isn't just me. And so I pulled a lot from the blog. I filled in the blanks in some places and really put together the kind of chronological story from his kindergarten year pre-diagnosis through, I believe, about fifth grade. And it talks about some school struggles. We had one teacher that was the worst in the entire world. I gave her the nickname of Miss Gulch because she is just the wicked way. It really felt like it. Like that was the worst year. And that was, my son had his one and only physical outburst in school, meltdown that year, because she had just pushed him till he exploded. A classroom clearing explosion. They had to get the kids out because he was shoving and throwing chairs and desks. And he's never done that. That's the one and only time that has ever happened. He's 15 now. So, teachers really can have a big effect. Parents ask sometimes, what do I do if, I really see that this teacher is not the right fit for my child? And I say, you demand another teacher immediately. The principal was very good, and she ended up switching him to a different classroom just for the last quarter because it had gotten so volatile. Once that happened, she knew he was not really that kid, and she knew that he was in a bad situation and moved him to a different classroom. But, this teacher would come to every functional behavior assessment meeting, every IEP meeting, and she would stand defiantly and say, no, I'm not doing that. No, I don't agree with it. Every time. We had 4 and 5 hour IEP meetings that year over and over. It was crazy. But, that's in there, our struggle with finding the right medication, my mom guilt about medication, so many things, some social issues, transitioning, meltdowns that we had when he was younger, all of that is chronicled in there. And very honestly, I don't sugarcoat things, which is kind of really the opposite of my personality. I have anxiety. I have pretty significant social anxiety. I'm always on guard with what I say and do around other people. But with this parenthood and with ADHD, I don't know. I just am very honest about it because I think that's what we need. We don't need somebody to say, oh, it's all going to be okay. You need that, but you need a whole lot more. You need to know how to make it okay, and how to get through it in one piece.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Darren and I are prepping for a big move at the moment, so we are fully leaning into any and everything that simplifies things, and that absolutely includes mealtimes. At a time when my executive functioning skills are being pushed to the limit, even planning and executing dinner for our family these days can feel like a really big lift. That's why I'm especially grateful for Green Chef, a meal service that offers pre-measured and prepped ingredients to my door. Each box is packed with foods you can feel good about, like whole fruits and vegetables, plus lean protein and whole grain options. In fact, one of the things I love most about Green Chef is that they offer options that prioritize gut and brain health, with science-backed recipes that feature ingredients like fiber, antioxidants, and omega-3 fatty acids. During this time of lots of stress, it feels really grounding to know we're supporting ourselves nutritionally. I will take all the support I can get. And Green Chef doesn't just cover dinner recipes. I can add high-quality breakfasts, lunches, and snacks to my weekly box from Green Market. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Symbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Symbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Symbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. I remember when your book, Boy Without Instructions, came out. And first of all, I love the cover. So listeners, check out the cover.
Thank you.
Really captured this essence of the chaos that we really are in the midst of when we're trying to navigate this. And the stories that you're sharing and just talking about the teacher interaction, that is so true. That it's just that one teacher can make all the difference. And, you know, when you're describing the outburst that your son had, our kids can sometimes feel like caged animals, you know, like when they're with that teacher. We had a teacher similarly that was just the wrong fit. And we were in a private school at the time, and we did try to get him moved, and they weren't having any of it. They insisted it had nothing to do with the teacher. And of course, after we left, many parents came up and said he would have been fine. I don't know about fine, but he would have done much better with the other teacher. I think that's just a good reminder that, you know, there are so many great teachers out there who are willing to really work with us. And it is important that we advocate and push for a move if we know that our child is, you know, potentially being emotionally harmed and in a classroom like that.
Yeah. And I think as parents, we kind of have this generalization that we can't go against the school. You know, the school is this government powerful entity and they have their rules and we can't change their rules, but we can for our kids when they need it.
Yes.
And it's really important, you know, and I didn't know that entire year to say, hey, move him to a different classroom. And we were really afraid of socially what that might do for him, because the kids were going to see him in a different room and they had already seen him have an exploding meltdown. That teacher made him apologize to the class the next day, which I completely lost my mind about with her and with the principal, because you don't apologize for something that was outside of your control, that your teacher, you know, was so hateful to you that it happened in I really was extremely upset about that, because she called extra attention to it and it was really inappropriate. But anyway, the principal said, you know, I think we should move him, but if you think it'll be more harmful, you know, we can keep him where he is. I'm like, no, I don't care what the other kids say. And he got the best teacher. And it was only, you know, for 9 weeks, but she was like an angel. She was amazing. She gave him so much just real compassion and extra attention with what he really needed. But he ended up repeating 4th grade the next year, because we realized that starting him in kindergarten when he was not yet 5 was a huge mistake. And we didn't realize it at the time because we didn't know he had a developmental delay. And so he was extremely bullied. He was having a really hard time socially. And so he wanted to repeat fourth grade after that year. I mean, he knew how awful it was. He told us he was afraid to go to fifth grade. He wanted a do-over, which is so sad that your kid needs a do-over, you know? But so he did repeat. It took a lot of wrangling to get the principal to approve because he was on or above grade level intelligence-wise. But we did, and it made such a huge difference. He has done so much better socially now because he's much closer. You know, now he's older than most of his peers a little bit, and that takes away a little bit of that developmental delay, you know, between his developmental age and his calendar age and the age of his peers. And so that's probably the one biggest and best decision we've made for him in light of his disability so far, is to have him repeat. And it was kind of a now or never thing, you know, he was getting older. And every single year at the end of the school year, I asked the teacher, should he repeat? Should he repeat kindergarten? Should he repeat first? And they all said, oh, no, he's going to catch up. He'll be fine. He's smart.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
that's everything.
It's not everything. And especially with bright kids, you know, there's asynchronous development. And so often intellectually, they may be ahead of their peers, but often emotionally, socially, they're below their peers. Mm-hmm. So when you combine that with him being younger than his peers to start with, that I can see, you know, how that could be really tricky for him.
Yeah. And functionally, he was way behind his peers. I mean, his executive function delay is extreme. When the psychologist did a brief with him when he was reevaluated for autism about 3 years ago, the section of the brief for organization, you know, they plot each on the chart. And the dot for that one was literally at the very tippy top line. He was almost literally off the chart in dysfunction in organization and planning skills. So, you know, I mean, that's huge in the school environment. And so once he hit third grade, they wanted more responsibility and accountability. And every year it just gets bigger and bigger. And that's been one of the toughest things in trying to work with teachers and work with the school, is for them to understand that, yes, he is super, super smart, but that doesn't mean that he can perform in the way you expect him to.
Right, right. I'd love to go back and tell me if you're comfortable talking about this, but medication is something we haven't spent a lot of time talking about on the show. And
Sure.
We don't medicate Asher. I bring it up to him as a option sometimes, you know, because he gets very frustrated with himself often for just lack of focus when he's really trying to work on something. And it's something he's at this point not wanting to try. And I've said, well, that's fine. I'm happy to, you know, try other approaches to see if we can support you in this way. But I'm curious to know, you know, you mentioned you had some mama guilt around that. And I'm just wondering, you know, how does your son feel about it? And how is that working for you?
So starting out, we had a really, really hard time with finding a medication that worked well for him and that kept working well for him. So some of the medications he just had really, really bad side effects with. Mood changes, you know, he is the sweetest, kindest kid. So if he starts getting angry and volatile, I know there's something going on. And, you know, there's two types of medications for ADHD. In the stimulants, there's two categories, amphetamines and methylphenidates. And so most people do well with one type or the other, but not both. For him, he couldn't take any of the amphetamines, Adderall, Vyvanse. They made him very moody and aggressive. But he did well on Concerta. But every 2 months, like clockwork, it quit working. And they would increase the dose and it would quit working. And they would increase the dose and it quit working. And then we were like, well, we can't increase it anymore because now we're seeing side effects from that. I learned much later that kids with high functioning autism often have this struggle. They're often very, very susceptible to side effects. You know, they get kind of the extreme rare side effects for a lot of it. And so, you know, we were seeing a really old physician at the time, and he had been in practice mental health pediatrics for, I would say, at least 30 years. He has since retired. I actually saw him at the store the other day and I went, oh, I'm so glad he's still around because he was just great, but he knew about this really old influenza medication called amantadine that was sometimes used off-label for ADHD. And he decided to try adding it to the Concerta and see if it helped. And it did. It made it last. Unfortunately, over a couple of years' time, it built up in his system and started causing some severe anxiety, but we did have to quit it. But once he hit puberty, we didn't have that same issue with the medication failing. And we didn't have the issue with him not eating anymore either. In the last year and a half or so, he's gained almost 100 pounds.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And about a foot and a half.
Oh,
I mean, he's just exploded in size. It's insane. It's happened so fast. It just blows my mind. But yeah, I mean, when he was 7 years old, I could count his ribs across the room and I would cry at night about, is he going to grow? What is happening? Is this a good thing? And now I have the opposite problem. Now I need him to quit eating all the time. And even though he's taking a stimulant. So, that journey was kind of hard for us, but it did make a difference for him. It helped him to really have an opportunity to some success. And after a couple of years, one summer, I was like, okay, I want to see where we are. Let's take a couple weeks off and see if he still really needs it. And after 4 days, he asked for it back. He was, I would say, 8 or 9 years old, probably 9 at the time. He asked for it back because he couldn't focus on anything. He couldn't sit down and build something out of Legos because he couldn't sit there long enough. He couldn't focus on it long enough. So it wasn't even a matter of, schoolwork. It wasn't a matter of, following instructions or meeting expectations or anything like that. He just could tell himself that he couldn't enjoy the things that he usually did that he wanted to, because he didn't have that focus. So for him so far, knock on wood, he's 15 and he does not refuse medication. He takes it every morning without even thinking about it. And I think part of that is because he's been taking it for a really long time. For him, it's just part of his life.
Yeah.
But, we tried again later and he still said, no, I really want to take it after a few days. So, he sees that difference. And for me, it's really a matter of giving him the opportunity to have some confidence, to meet some expectations, and to enjoy things. And he couldn't do that stuff before medication. And his hyperactivity has waned a great deal since he hit puberty. He is most of the time not literally bouncing off the walls and the furniture like he used to be. He was the human Tigger. And part of that is that he also has sensory issues and his proprioceptive input is like 0. And so kids crash into things when they have that issue because then they can feel where they are in space because they don't have a good sense.
Yeah.
Which was a huge aha moment for me when the OT told us about that very early on. But, a lot of that has really waned, which is good. But, he still needs medication to help kind of slow his mind down and help him to be able to focus for more than 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, for us, it really, I did have mom guilt for a long time, especially when we had side effects. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? But I had to remind myself that we made that decision for him and his benefit. It was not for us. And people talk about medication being the easy way out all the time. It's harder. It is a harder way to go in a lot of respects. As a parent, from the parental side, it's harder. There's a lot more guilt and anxiety and, watching for side effects and trying to get it just right. And, I felt like that was a harder choice to make on a daily basis. And, every now and then I have I wish he didn't have to take medicine. I wonder if there's another way, but we've tried it all. There's not another way. I mean, we have tried everything except for neurofeedback. And that was just, because of financial barriers. And medication really is the best thing for him. And, maybe when he gets older, he won't need it. Who's to say? He might have that teen boy thing that seems to kick in for a lot of kids with ADHD, that they want to manage it all themselves. And they don't want to take medicine. They don't want to talk about having it. And, but so far he has not.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's definitely something all of us with kids who have ADHD have to think about at some point, and we all make our decisions. And I think you're absolutely right. There is no easy decision, and taking the medication route, I can just imagine that it is layered, right? With all these complications and questioning. I mean, I think we're constantly questioning if we should be doing more, if we're doing the right things. But I've heard recently from a couple of friends actually who are adults who've been diagnosed and they've started medication as adults well into their 30s and 40s and saying, oh my goodness, my life is completely different. And I had no idea this was going on for me. So it's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it really can make a huge difference. And I don't think that medication or stimulant medication is the answer for every single person with ADHD. There are some people who can regulate and do well without it. But I think, on the more severe end of the spectrum, and especially when you add other factors in like learning disabilities, I don't like to see parents who make a decision about medication for their child for ADHD out of fear, because I think there's so much misinformation about ADHD medication out there. And we had the same problem. When he was diagnosed, my husband was like, I am not drugging him, because we didn't know better either. You hear what is the common misconception out there, and you don't know any better until it's you, and you have to dive in and you have to really learn more. And over time, we realize that it's not at all doping a child into submission. It's just helping to kind of right a wrong in their neurology, to fill in the gaps where neurotransmitters are lacking or not being efficiently used by the brain and the body. So it's hard. You really have to. And that's what I always encourage parents who ask questions about medication. Please, please, please find reputable sources and learn the facts about it, because it really is different from public opinion and what everybody fears about it.
Well, it was interesting. I didn't realize that you said that sometimes the extreme side effects are more apt to happen with a child who also has a diagnosis of autism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about that connection between ADHD and autism. And you discovered that your son was autistic later on down the road. Was that a surprise to you? And I'm just curious about how you see those two things working together. When we initially got the diagnosis, I was told you can't technically have both, but he does. So I was like, right. What does that mean?
So yes, the diagnostic statistical manual that we had prior to 2015, which was the 4th edition, said that you could not have both diagnoses, that physicians should not be diagnosing ADHD and autism in the same patient. When the DSM-5 came out in 2015, that quantification was removed. So now physicians can diagnose both in the same patient. And I'm seeing so much more of it. Of course, this was not something I knew before it was part of our story, and I had to learn more about it. But once he hit about age 10, which was 4 years after diagnosis, I started to recognize some pieces that weren't fitting with ADHD. Some really intense social issues, some really intense reading other people, not just body language, but tone of voice and intention. He had no way of interpreting intention from others at all, because he's a very concrete thinker, very black and white. So everything is 100% literal. And so by the time he hit 6th grade and boys are mean to each other to show you that they like you and they want to be your friend, he was having meltdowns about this stuff every day. And that was probably the biggest sign for me. But there were just a lot of little nuances that I was like, if this was really only ADHD, some of this stuff should be getting better. And so I started having him reevaluated. And it took 2 years for me to find a clinician that would look deep enough to see it, because he makes good eye contact. He has excellent conversations with adults, and he doesn't really stim. So all of these stereotypical pieces of autism were missing for him. And a lot of clinicians didn't want to look past that. They didn't feel the need to look past that. Our first evaluation was at an organization called TEACH, which is part of the University of North Carolina system, and it's a nonprofit. And they are supposed to be, the absolute best evaluation for autism. We waited 9 months to get in and had the pre-interview with me and passed that yes, he should be evaluated. Then he was given the ADOS, which is supposed to be the Cadillac of autism evaluations. And they sat down with us at the end of the day and said, ADHD fits better, and did not give him the diagnosis. And I was kind of crushed because I just, as educated as I have made myself about these things over the years, I knew there was something else there. And I felt kind of cheated that they were saying, well, this one thing fits better, so we're just going to stick to that. Because I feel like to understand a child fully, you need to know all the pieces. And, a lot of people are anti-label, but the label, the diagnosis, is helping us understand parts of our kids.
Right.
And their story, their truth, their struggle. And so, and I also felt like autism is much more accepted and understood in the public and especially in school. And that's why I kept pursuing it. I could see the nuances. I could work with them. I understood them, where they were coming from, but I really wanted that extra level of definition for the school in the hopes that would improve our school experience for him. And so a couple of other psychologists came through our therapist office. They didn't last. I don't know why. So we would be on the books to see somebody, and they would say, oh, well, I'm leaving the practice in a week, so I can't evaluate, but let's chat and see. And one said, no way. The other one said, yeah, probably. And I finally found someone here in town, a psychologist who was really, really well-versed in high-functioning autism. It was kind of her focus for many years. And she wasn't in private practice anymore. She was actually running a home for kids here, like a day school and a boarding school for kids with those kind of struggles. But she agreed to meet on the weekends and evaluate him. And in the report, in her conclusion on the last page, she said that he was the clinical definition of hiding in plain sight.
Interesting.
As far as autism. Yeah. So it was tough to get that. And since then, there was a study a year or two ago that I wrote about for Healthline that showed that kids who already have a diagnosis of ADHD on average get an autism diagnosis an average of 3 years later than if they didn't already have the ADHD diagnosis, because so many symptoms really overlap. There's so many symptoms of one that could be the other and vice versa. So it's really hard to tease it apart. And so, it does really take a clinician that's willing to dive very deep and look at everything. I mean, this woman I think we did at least 10 rating scales, if not more. She went back and talked to the therapist that we had worked with, all sorts of people, and really took her time to get a very clear picture of every little piece. And then she could very clearly see it. But it's, if you would meet him and talk to him, somebody like you and I who knows about ADHD and autism, you would pick up on ADHD probably. You would probably not pick up on the autism. It's more of a daily functioning and a social peer-to-peer functioning thing for him, and getting stuck. That was the other symptom that I was noticing that was really beyond the scope of ADHD, as he would get stuck on thoughts, not just fear thoughts, but if there was something he wanted, he would get stuck until and beyond perseveration even. And that, is a definite symptom for some of autism, of getting really stuck. So, there were just little signs, but it's very, very common for ADHD or autism to kind of camouflage the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, you were hoping that this would make it easier for him to be understood in school and things. Have you noticed a difference, or has it changed your experience having that additional diagnosis?
Not really.
No.
No.
Okay.
No, that was such a bummer because I really had high hopes for that. But it's that invisible disability thing. It's just so hard. And I feel like being twice exceptional makes it twice as hard because that whole seeing that a kid is smart and judging their capability on that is very crushing when, your kid has so many challenges in being able to communicate how smart they are in the ways that the school expects. And so we're still in that mode of struggle. And I think that probably happens to a lot of kids that just have the high functioning autism diagnosis is, oh, they're smart, so surely they can perform. And I think a lot in the media, high functioning autism is portrayed as very organized to a fault, lining up cars, categorizing things, that sort of thing. And that's not every kid with high functioning autism. Some of them have executive functioning disabilities or deficits, and that can be really overwhelming and pervasive.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.
I'd love to switch gears. I want to make sure we have time to talk about your other books. So you've also, in addition to Boy Without Instructions, you wrote What to Expect When Parenting Children with ADHD. You mentioned that at the beginning. And then you also have a book, The Insider's Guide to ADHD. And what I know of you and from you is you're very much about supporting parents who are raising these kids understand not only how to best support their kids, but how to best support themselves. So would you mind sharing with us a couple of things, a couple of takeaways that our listeners could take with them, maybe some game changers for you that helped you find more peace and confidence in your own journey?
Sure. Yeah. The first big aha for us was reading The Explosive Child by Ross Greene. And I know that you are a big Ross Greene fan as well.
Indeed.
That completely changed the way I saw my son and his behavior and helped me to really understand him. And I always tell parents, part of my online course is that there's a whole section on getting to know your child. And I know when people first see that, they're like, I know my kid, I live with my kid. But it's about really diving deep and really understanding every nuance, getting to know their strengths and weaknesses, getting to know specifically how ADHD or autism affects their day-to-day. getting to know their triggers for behavior, getting to know their emotional intensity or sensitivity or both. All of these things are really important pieces of doing the best we can for our kids. And so that was a big one, because then I was able to really clearly see behavior as a function of something else, as a symptom, rather than the actual problem. And I just did a podcast on this a few weeks ago, completely on behavior being a symptom and not your actual problem. And of course, I got that from Ross Greene. And that was a big takeaway for me from reading his latest book recently, Raising Human Beings. And so, I think that is such an important piece. And, behavior is communication. What is your child trying to tell you when they're exploding, or when they're crying when, a typical child their age wouldn't be, or when they're refusing to do their work, when they're refusing to do what you asked? All these things feel like the problem in the moment, but they're not. They're just a symptom of the underlying problem. So when you really start to dive deep and get to know your child on that whole different level, you can make so much better decisions about your parenting, and you can be so much more compassionate and intentional in the way that you interact with your child. And for kids like ours, that is paramount. Like, I think that is the number one most important thing, is to be calm and compassionate and intentional and very mindful, which plays into that intentional piece. And so, my next big aha really after that was when I started researching to write The Insider's Guide to ADHD. And that book was born just out of a real desperate feeling on my part to know what life was like for my son, to have some sort of real good feeling for what functioning with his brain is like. And I thought, well, who better to ask than adults who have ADHD, who used to be kids who had ADHD. And I just started surveying and interviewing a bunch of adults with ADHD. It ended up being 97 of them, I believe, in the end. And I came out, when I pulled all that together, there were some very big common threads for all of these people. And one was being accepted for who they are and being allowed to be themselves. So not trying to make them fit in the box that they're never going to fit in, but to help them find their passions and their talents and their interests, and to feed off of that instead. Another was being misunderstood was very detrimental to them. They really, and it clouded their relationship with their parents too. A lot of them said, I don't talk to my parents very much as an adult. I don't trust my parents. I don't confide in them because they never really understood me. I never got a good reaction as a child when I tried to tell them how I really felt. And so, this whole thing, all of these little pieces that were very common ended up saying that, our child's truth, their individual personal truth, is what's most important to be our guide as parents for kids with ADHD. And it totally goes for high-functioning autism as well. And what that means is to know your child on that very deep level, to really understand every disability and how it affects them, to really understand what it's like for them in school, to really understand their reactions to things, emotional or getting stuck, or, all of that, meltdowns. Anger is a big one for a lot of people as well. And so all of these things together kind of formulate your child's truth. They formulate this picture of what your child's day-to-day is like for you. And it helps you then to create appropriate expectations for where your child is. Because if we set neurotypical expectations for our kids, they can never meet them. And so you're a frustrated parent because they're never meeting your expectations. you have a frustrated child who feels down and lacks confidence because they can never meet expectations. So using your child's truth and exactly where they are in this moment to set expectations is huge, because you get to succeed, your child gets to succeed, you have a win-win, whereas as an authoritarian parent, you win and your child loses. If you have an authoritarian relationship, your child never wins, ever. They're only doing what you've commanded of them, if they're even able to meet that expectation. So, that whole collaborative approach of Ross Greene's is really important. The book, How to Talk to Your Kids So They'll Listen and How to Listen So They'll Talk, which isn't exactly right. I don't think it doesn't sound right, but it's close. And that, that kind of goes into the same, it's very much in the same vein as Ross Greene's teachings. And, all of that stuff that I had already read was exactly what all of these adults were telling me that they needed, or, some of them had it as a child, and they talked about how great it was, how they felt like they could be themselves, how they were able to, really find their interests and what they wanted to do with their life that way because they were allowed to explore. So, it just really reinforced for me that knowing my child very intimately and why he does the things he does, why he struggles in the ways that he does, was paramount to my success. It taught me the appropriate ways to approach, my parenting with him.
That's great. That's such helpful insight and takeaways. Thank you for sharing that. I obviously agree with everything that you're saying. That's right. I'm very much about, I call it becoming fluent in our child's language. I think that's just absolutely critical to create a secure environment, where our kids can feel good about who they are. And I haven't read The Insider's Guide to ADHD, and I'm super curious now to check that out because, I think of it as kind of like Danny Reed at Asperger Experts, like getting that inside perspective it's really exciting to see what's going on inside the mind. So, great resources. And I would love if you could share with us how listeners can connect with you. Your website has a lot of great resources. I know you offer online courses. You have a podcast. You have some great videos on there that I have checked out. And so how can parents learn more about the work that you're doing and find you?
The easiest way to kind of connect with almost all of it is to go to Parenting ADHD and Autism.com. There you will find a page for the podcast, which of course is also on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, and it's called the Parenting ADHD Podcast. I do have online courses. The Complete Guide to Parenting ADHD is a self-paced, completely online course that actually walks you through the entire process that's outlined in what to expect when parenting children with ADHD. Very useful. It's like 50 hours worth of training videos, but they're chopped up into really small chunks, very manageable. There's a link there to that and to another small course on self-care that I have out there, information about my parent coaching program. And then, there's a lot of free information too. There's, I think, almost 200 blog posts on there now. There are a few videos. There's several free downloads, an ADHD cheat sheet. There's just all sorts of stuff there that people can check out, and everything is really linked up in there. You'll find a link to the Happy Mama Retreat that we do once a year. And next year, I'm also starting a weekend intensive parenting retreat for moms called Purposeful Parenting Boot Camp. And there's information there as well for that. So I'm spread all over the place.
You are a busy woman, it sounds like.
I just really want to share everything that I learn. I hate the thought of other kids and other families struggling. All the information is there. Nobody has to, sit down and start from scratch and figure it out anymore. 9 years ago when my son was diagnosed, it really was, we didn't have online courses. We didn't have any sort of guidebook. We read The Explosive Child. We read Super Parenting for ADD, and we put all these pieces together. We read a lot on Attitude Magazine, and, so there's a wealth of information now from people like you and I who have tried to pull it together in a way that parents can use it to get on the right path much more quickly.
And you can be a tour guide instead of people having to find their own path. You can show people the way. So that's awesome. No, it's, again, so many resources on there. Listeners, I'll make sure all the links are on the show notes page so you can check out Penny's website and her podcast and everything that she just shared with us. So Penny, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been just fun to connect with you and hear your story. And you're a few years ahead of me, so I'm always curious to hear from people who are a little further down the road in terms of where their child is and their journey, because it gives me a window of what it might look like for us. So anyway, thank you for this conversation today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To go deeper into this episode, visit the extensive show notes page. For every episode, there's a dedicated page on my website with links to all the resources mentioned, a full transcript, and a podcast player with key takeaways marked so you can easily go back and re-listen to the sections you're most interested in. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of the book Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting. This episode was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita, and show notes were put together by myself, Andrea, and Lindsay McFadden. If you get a lot out of this podcast and want to help cover the cost of its production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. On Patreon, you can sign up to make a small monthly contribution, as little as $2 a month, and it's super easy to sign up. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more, or click on the Patreon link on any show notes page. To follow Tilt Parenting on social media, go to @tiltparenting on Instagram and Twitter and on Facebook. Lastly, please help this podcast stay visible and easily found by the listeners who need it by subscribing and leaving a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about this podcast or any of the resources that Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.